welcome to the 99th episode of the Henry George. Bum, 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 bum. You two have two active. Active meaning switched on. Uh-oh. I may have uploaded the wrong video yesterday. Yes, I did. Delete forever. Mm-mm-mm. We really ought to. There goes chapter 4. Welcome to the 100th episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional. We have started Book 10, Chapter 1. Looks pretty long. I don't think we'll make it all the way through, but that's okay. We're making progress and hopefully at the same time eliminating poverty of thought. Hmm? My name is Max, and I am a Georgist. I'm recording these recording readings because my friend John didn't like the free audiobook of Progress and Poverty, and it is my mission to make John a Georgist. One day, we'll find out. What in me is dark, illumine, what is low, raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. Milton. Paradise Lost? Who knows what Milton work that's from. Chapter 1, The Current Theory of Human Progress, Its Insufficiency. We have a new link. In the conclusions, if the conclusions at which we have arrived are correct, they will fall under a larger generalization. Let us therefore recommence our inquiry from a higher standpoint, whence we may survey a wider field. What is the law of human progress? Oh yeah, I wanted to read Chapter 1, The Current Theory of Human Progress, Its Insufficiency. Chapter 2, Differences in Civilization, To What Do. Chapter 3, The Law of Human Progress. Chapter 4, How Modern Civilization May Decline. Chapter 5, The Central Truth. I will warn you that the claims in this book are, I guess I would say, a little more hand-wavy. They're a little bit more like, this is how George feels. It's less like, here we have our basic claim, and now let's follow through its consequences, from what I remember. What is the law of human progress? This is the question which, were it not for what has gone before, I should hesitate to review in the brief space I can now devote to it, as it involves directly or indirectly some of the very highest problems with which the human mind can engage. What's funny to me is, reminds me of criticisms I've heard of academia, where no one's brave enough, whatever that means, to ask general broad questions like like in philosophy, nobody asks anymore what is the meaning of life. Instead they narrow so that they can ask, I don't know, what's philosophy journal, the Journal of Philosophy. Look at some volume from 2018. Structuralism response to skepticism. Why the reward structures? Oh, the replication crisis. That's pretty good. I don't know. And it's hard for me to even think of any other economics viewpoint that even like if you'd asked me what is the law of human progress, I'd never even heard a claim from somebody before what they thought the law of human progress was. Anyway, and then there's both the part of me that thinks answering these basic questions I don't know, they're not as hard and complex in some sense. Like his answer is just justice. And it doesn't seem like it's I agree it's like a high problem sort of, but it doesn't seem super hard or complicated. Anyway, I spoiled it. The law of human progress is uh, association with other men in a just um, relationship, which he says, is freedom, from what I remember. All right, so George writes, but it is a question which naturally comes up. Are or are not the conclusions to which we have come consistent with the great law under which human development goes on? What is that law? We must find the answer to our question, for the current philosophy, though it clearly recognizes the existence of such a law, gives no more satisfactory account of it than the current political economy does of the persistence of want amid advancing wealth. Let us, as far as possible, keep to the firm ground of facts. Whether man was or was not gradually developed from an animal is not necessary to inquire. Okay? However intimate may be the connection between questions which relate to man as we know him and questions which relate to his genesis, it is only from the former upon the latter that light can be thrown. Inference cannot proceed from the unknown to the known. It is only from facts of which we are cognizant that we can infer what has preceded cognizance. However man may have originated, all we know of him is as man, just as he is now to be found. There is no record or trace of him in any lower condition than that in which savages are still to be met. This kind of approach, I mean, I think there is value in discussing the genesis of man, certainly, but this kind of attitude I sort of think is similarly helpful to apply um, to the environment or genetics explanation when you're considering just like the situation of people in society. Um, but that's a little, uh, yeah, off topic, I guess. Although, wait, I do think George gets there, but I don't know if it's in this chapter or the next or whatever. It's in this book, and he starts talking about genetics versus nature versus nurture. George continues, by whatever bridge he may have crossed the wide chasm, which now separates him from the brutes, there remain of it no vestiges. Between the lowest savages of whom we know and the highest animals, there is an irreconcilable difference, a difference not merely of degree but of kind. Many of the characteristics, actions, and emotions of man are exhibited by the lower animals, but man, no matter how low in the scale of humanity, has never yet been found destitute of one thing of which no animal shows the slightest trace, a clearly recognizable but almost undefinable something which gives him the power of improvement, which makes him the progressive animal. The beaver builds a dam, and the bird a nest, and the bee a cell. But while beavers, dams, and birds' nests and bees' cells are always constructed on the same model, the house of the man passes from the rude hut of leaves and branches to the magnificent mansion, replete with modern conveniences. The dog can to a certain extent connect cause and effect and may be taught some tricks, but his capacity in these respects has not been a whit increased during all the ages he has been the associate of improving man. And the dog of civilization is not a whit more accomplished or intelligent than the dog of the wandering savage. We know of no animal that uses clothes, that cooks its food, that makes itself tools or weapons, that breeds other animals that it wishes to eat, or that has an articulate language. But men who do not do such things have never yet been found or heard of except in fable. That is to say, man, wherever we know him, exhibits this power of supplementing what nature has done for him by what he does for himself. And in fact, so inferior is the physical endowment of man that there is no part of the world, save perhaps some of the small islands of the Pacific, where without this faculty he could maintain an existence. Anybody see that video of the uncontacted tribe in Brazil, I think? Amazon? Man everywhere and at all times exhibits this faculty. Everywhere and at all times of which we have knowledge, he has made some use of it. Well, we wouldn't really know much about the times that we don't know about. But yeah, I don't think there's great excavation sites of the bees' cells and the birds' nests and the beavers' dams anywhere. Anyway, again, as George said earlier, the point isn't about our genesis, or we don't need to. The things he's going to talk about aren't reliant on our genesis. But the degree in which this has been done greatly varies between the rude canoe and the steamship, between the boomerang and the repeating rifle, between the roughly carved wooden idol and the breathing marble of Grecian art, between savage knowledge and modern science, between the wild Indian and the white settler, between the Hottentot woman and the belle of polished society. There is an enormous difference. The varying degrees in which this faculty is used cannot be ascribed to differences in original capacity. The most highly improved peoples of the present day were savages within historic times, and we meet with the widest differences between peoples of the same stock. Nor can they be wholly ascribed to differences in physical environment. The cradles of learning and the arts are now in many cases tenanted by barbarians, and within a few years great cities rise on the hunting grounds of wild tribes. All these differences are evidently connected with social development. Beyond perhaps the veriest rudiments, it becomes possible for man to improve only as he lives with his fellows. All these improvements, therefore, in man's powers and conditions, we summarize in the term civilization. Men improve as they become civilized or learn to cooperate in society. What is the law of this improvement? By what common principle can we explain the different stages of civilization at which different communities have arrived? In what consists essentially the progress of civilization, so that we may say of varying social adjustments, this favors it, and that does not? Or explain why an institution or condition which may at one time advance, it may at another time retard it. Advance it. May at another time retard it. The prevailing belief now is that the progress of civilization is a development or evolution in the course of which man's powers are increased and his qualities improved by the operation of causes similar to those which are relied upon as explaining the genesis of species, viz., the survival of the fittest and the hereditary transmission of acquired qualities. That civilization is an evolution, that it is, in the language of Herbert Spencer, a progress from an indefinite, incoherent homogeneity to a definite, coherent heterogeneity, there is no doubt. But to say this is not to explain or identify the causes which forward or retard it. How far the sweeping generalizations of Spencer, which seek to account for all phenomena, incidentally, in a book I was reading last night, threw some shade at Herbert Spencer, saying that he was sickly and confined and likely a lifelong virgin. I mean, maybe those aren't, I don't know. I just thought it was funny. How far the sweeping generalizations of Spencer, which seek to account for all phenomena under terms of matter and force, may, properly understood, include all these causes, I am unable to say. Okay, so we're not sure, George isn't sure about these sweeping generalizations. But as scientifically expounded, the development philosophy has either not yet definitely met this question, or has given birth, or rather coherency, to an opinion which does not accord with the facts. That's right. The subject of this chapter is the insufficiency as the current remedies, or is that the term that was used? The current theory of human progress, insufficient. The vulgar explanation of progress is, I think, very much like the view naturally taken by the money maker of the causes of the unequal distribution of wealth. Excuse me. His theory, if he has one, usually is that there is plenty of money to be made by those who have will and ability, and that it is ignorance or idleness or extravagance that makes the difference between the rich and the poor. And so the common explanation of differences of civilization is of differences in capacity. I guess this is sort of tacitly believed, but a lot of lip service is definitely paid to equal capacity. But I don't feel like our societies act in a way that demonstrates a true belief in that. The civilized races are the superior races, and advance in civilization is according to this superiority. Just as English victories were in common English opinion, I think I think the average person has lost faith in this sort of claim. I think there's still plenty of I don't know. I think plenty of people still view third world countries as somehow a reflection of that pool of people's lack of capacity. But I think that that's like losing ground. I think the elite is also like perfectly fine with how do I don't know. I guess they're perfectly fine with all of like the upper middle class people being bleeding hearts or like crying out that we need to help all these people. Like there's something about it's like George's quote about charity when it is in place of justice, it is vile and something else. George quotes charity. Charity is false, futile, and poisonous when offered as a substitute for justice. And I grew up in super, altruistic church community, and we would go to poor places in Mexico and build houses. Um, I knew people who went to Africa. I went one other time to the Bahamas. I know my mom and sister went to Honduras to help these people. Um, I do think those were good acts, but it's like perfectly acceptable with the land owning elites to be viewed as like saviors or people who go out and like help these poor people. And like we're not going to try to judge them for being poor in the way they were. And I think maybe the view has shifted from, oh, it's not that Africans or Central South Americans uh, are um, less capable, it's that they have these really terrible corrupt governments. I feel like that's sort of what the modern view has shifted to, that it's these corrupt governments. And there is this, I guess the history of the 20th century was of a lot of attempt at elevating societies by just instilling the right democracy in place. Of course, what I mean by democracy is whatever the modern West nation states have for their current governments. I'm just saying those kinds of governments, whether that's democracy or not, is a separate issue. I tend to think we do not live in a actual um, society that is for the people, by the people, of the people. I think we uh, I think we are dominated by a ruling class of wealth and land interests that are able to dominate electoral politics for several different factors. Um, all right, I feel pretty happy with that sort of realization that I think the modern view has improved, that it's not purely racial or cultural judging so much. Well, I guess there's probably some cultural judgment. It's definitely more about these greedy rulers, um, which I kind of think is correct. Um, but we just haven't yet figured out at a large level what is the like what it's not just swapping out the rulers to make ones that are a little less greedy or play by the rules, because that's sort of how it's working in America. Like everyone here that's in leadership sort of plays by the rules for the most part. I mean, we don't need to get into certain. I never like to get too topical to the current events, um, but traditionally, uh, we have way less. Um, what would you call it? Common bribery, common corruption, and our system seems really just legally corrupt. Anyway, let's get back to George. That was a long, yeah. Let's get back to George. Um, it is ignorance, idleness, extravagance that makes the difference between the rich and the poor. I mean, which is so funny about the extravagance line, because it's like, oh, if you're extravagant when you're poor, you won't be able to get rich, and then when you're rich, you can be extravagant. So it's just like passing through that middle time, which I can understand some functions acting that way. Anyway, okay. And so the common explanation of differences of civilization is of differences in capacity. The civilized races are the superior races, and advance in civilization is according to this superiority. Just as English victories were in common English opinion, due to the natural superiority of Englishmen to frog-eating Frenchmen, and popular government, active invention, and greater average comfort are or were until lately, in common American opinion, due to the greater smartness of the Yankee nation. Maybe I should be more topical, because this is all making me think of the Olympics, which is happening right now, if you're watching this in the future. Now, just as the politico-economic doctrines which in the beginning of this inquiry we met and disproved. D. Bruce says he was pretty woke, or he was pretty woke, was Henry George, much more than Marx. You know, I should probably actually read Marx, considering that's the ideology that kind of absorbed a lot of Georgism, and if I am to speak about that, I should familiarize myself with his actual writings. Um, yes, so we met and disproved Malthusianism and a whole bunch of other ineffectual remedies. Wages coming from capital. That was a good one. Good joke. All right, so we met and disproved them. So we want our politico-economic doctrines to harmonize with the common, or no, let's just now, just as the politico-economic doctrines, which in the beginning of this inquiry we met and disproved, harmonize with the common opinion of men who see capitalists paying wages and competition reducing wages, just as the Malthusian theory harmonized with existing prejudices both of the rich and of the poor, so does the explanation of progress as a gradual race improvement harmonized with the vulgar opinion which accounts by race differences for differences in civilization. It has given coherence and a scientific formula to opinions which already prevailed. Its wonderful spread since the time Darwin first startled the world with his Origin of Species has not been so much a conquest as an assimilation. Yeah, there's one thing I see with the I don't know, maybe I see this because there's this sense sometimes I get when people watch the Olympics of I don't know, the different, quote unquote races have their like specializations. And I do like sometimes wish that you would see winners from all, a diversity of winners in all the different sports sometimes. 'Cause I do think a lot of the success of certain countries and certain sports is not due to some natural capacity, but it is sort of a cultural preference and other like sort of um, circumstantial circumstances. Uh, However, of course, in some activities, you can't deny, um, like in swimming, it just helps if you have big torsos, big hands. In distance running, if you tend to have lots of long, long legs and big lungs, you're gonna crush it. And in gymnastics, the physics works way better for you when you are uh, when you take up less volume, so that the surface area of your muscles is much greater compared to the mass that you carry, as well as um, like lever mechanics are much easier when your limbs are not super duper long. Being tall is helpful in basketball. So, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. The view which now dominates the world of thought is this, that the struggle for existence, just in proportion as it becomes intense, impels men to new efforts and inventions, that this improvement and capacity for improvement is fixed by hereditary transmission and extended by the tendency of the best adapted individual or most improved individual to survive and propagate among individuals, and one of the best adapted or most improved tribe, nation, or race to survive in the struggle between social aggregates. On this theory, the differences between man and the animals and differences in the relative progress of men are now explained as confidently and all but as generally as a little while ago they were explained upon the theory of special creation and divine interposition. All right. Thanks for joining for the 100th episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional. I'll see you later. All right. Thanks for coming by, Bruce. Don't bring me down. Bruce! We are in Book 10, Chapter 1. Start. Oops. We would call this, well, we gotta put, oh, hang on. This is where we're ending. Okay. This is the name of our chapter. This is the name of our book. Book X, Chapter I. Oh, I think what you were just speaking on is clear to find Lawrence Lessig's Republic Lost from Sweet Nanny Goat. I missed that comment because, well, I'd gotten a couple spam comments I had deleted and actually thought that was one of those. That's interesting. Lawrence Lessig's Republic Lost. I don't remember which what was I talking about when are you still here? Sweet Nanny Goat. Oh, bad government, corrupt governments. Yeah, time out. Yeah. Are you familiar with that's interesting. I've been pretty despairing of ever figuring out corrupt government. Of course, until I learned about Georgism, I was very confused. If you had made me Supreme Chancellor of the Galaxy, I honestly would have to have just started studying and talking to people because I wouldn't have known um, what policies to implement, frankly, because I really believed in free market and a lot of the capitalism framework, but I just couldn't explain why it wasn't working. It was just like the results were in, and somehow the theory didn't quite work out right to seem to prevent. Yeah. Anyway, um, but now I'm pretty into sortition to get rid of electoral politics. Um, I wonder if this guy presenting a solution or is he just sort of describing the state of things as how corrupt they are? Oh, and they plan to stop it. Um, wonder what his plan is. He has the problem figured out, but he misses. But yeah, well, I would highly recommend sortition, multi-body sortition, as a very. I've only been learning about it for maybe 9 months or so. Um, I have this bookmark here, The Trouble with Elections. I'm only like two-thirds of the way or through this book. But the idea is that fundamental to elections is that the people who can run for election just will always come from the wealthy upper class. Um, and that is just sort of fundamentally problematic. Strategies for improvement, campaign funding, constitutional convention for campaign. So one of the big things, yeah, campaign fund, yeah. I used to be, um, I used to be a believer. I mean, I'm very pragmatic about how I would try campaign finance reform. I think we've tried, and especially in like Australia and certain other countries, they've tried a lot of voting reform, and it just that doesn't seem to work. I don't know if sortition will work, but honestly, like none of these things seem super principled to me. So it's just kind of like we need to keep iterating. We need to keep I definitely know that our founding fathers did not think our Constitution was this sacred document that should be enshrined and held to like the inerrant, God-breathed, um, Holy Bible. In fact, I think Jefferson or somebody said it like every 19 years they should make a new Constitution or something. It would be good for me to learn these details so I could understand more thoroughly the ways in which our system is broken, but it's kind of depressing. All right, I've been chatting and I have to go. I'm going to go do some yoga, staying healthy. Yeah, one of Leslie's ideas is to pay politicians a lot more money so they are less tempted by bribes. That's interesting. Yeah, and I don't know. I wonder what his opinions are on term limits. I don't know. I think I mean, being a Georgist, I blame much of the suffering of society on landlordism. And so when I look at electoral politics, like 99% of our Congress and elected officials are landlords. I don't know, it's kind of a made up statistic, but it's something like that. And the pool from which you are electing people is almost always, the wealthy elite or people, as this book is saying, are controlled by the wealthy elite. I think you could fight that more, but it definitely is just going to tend towards that in general with electoral mechanics. And so the idea of sortition is forming legislative bodies like we do a jury. You select the membership at random. They meet for some finite amount of time. It would be optional and it would be compensated. So unlike a jury where you have a lot of unwilling participants, you would have only people who accepted it and you would also be paying them some amount of money, a decent amount, whereas with jury duty, it's often completely unpaid. Um, yeah, I do too. Again, it's not coming from like with Georgism, I believe with my heart and my mind. Sortition, campaign finance, it's not about my heart. It's purely about, is this the cleverest way we can disincentivize corruption, and we can represent the people and not have a dominant ruling class. It's purely like game theory for me. Anyway, thanks for coming by. I will. Thanks for sharing this book. I have to go. Oh, I started recording. Let's stop.